Well, this morning we're going to continue a series that we've just recently started called A New Beginning, and we're going to be today in the 20th chapter of John's Gospel. So if you have a way to access John chapter 20 today, this is the scene of the resurrection. And so nobody had any idea as they made their way to the tomb that everything was going to change. The history was going to change. Their lives were going to change. Nobody had any idea what was happening as they would open up, or as they would come to the tomb opened up, and then they would sort of run back. If you know the story, they would run back and tell the disciples, the body of Jesus is gone. No, we don't know where they put him. And then Peter and John run to the tomb, and the Bible says there, it says, John looks inside, and they don't see Jesus, but it says that he believes. He doesn't understand, but he believes. And then Mary comes, and Mary Magdalene, she turns around and she sees Jesus, but she doesn't know it's Jesus. She sees angels. She doesn't know they're angels. She turns around, she sees Jesus. She doesn't know it's Jesus. And we've talked about how in the last couple of weeks that each one of those represents a challenge for them to experience this incredible new beginning. First of all, for John, who says, I believe, but I don't understand, the challenge of understanding becomes such a big part of understanding what this whole new beginning and what this means. And then for Mary, who's literally looking at the face of Jesus, but she doesn't realize the new beginning has happened yet. Until finally she hears his voice, and he says, Mary, and she says, Rabboni, Rabbi, teacher. And both of these moments represent the kinds of challenges that we face in our lives if we want to experience a new beginning. And we're going to look at another one of those today. We're calling it the challenge of mission. But this week I was just kind of thinking, there's even kind of a bigger challenge just sort of kind of hovering in the air above all of these others. And it's the challenge of, do I even really care? Somebody was doing some statistics, they were going around and they were polling Americans. What's the greatest problem in America today? Is it ignorance or apathy? And people kept saying over and over again, I don't know and I don't care. And thanks for the ha. The first challenge of all of this, if we're going to have any breakthroughs in our lives spiritually, if we're ever going to have any new beginnings in our life, is just to go, I care enough to actually see that happen. And then we're going to face these challenges along the way. And one of these is the challenge of mission. You might think of mission as not the question of what, but it's the question why. And so many times in life, we're so focused on the what questions, we never bother to ask the more important why questions. And so you really what you want to do is you kind of want to start with kind of more foundational stuff when you're having a new beginning. I was thinking this week of the famous basketball coach, John R. Wooden. And, Wooden's just so famous, one of the winningest coaches ever. And I love basketball. And I just love the stories about Wooden and how he would get this young group of just really great basketball players together. And then he would start out, guys, we're going to talk about how to play the game of basketball. And he would start by teaching them how to put on their socks and show them how to lace up their shoes. It's kind of humiliating, to do that to a group of... But those guys today, they all tell the stories about how he started with the absolute basics. And if he would explain that if you don't get those things right, you're probably not going to get all those other things right too. So let's start today with one of the most basic questions, like the why question. The why am I here? The why am I on earth? The why do I exist question. And we're not here just to be born, to grow up, to get a job, to have kids, to live a life, and then have a little bit of success and a little bit of joy and a little bit of happiness and then die. There's more to life than that. And in fact, Jesus is going to talk about that in this passage we're going to read in just a moment. This is going to be the moment when the disciples together are going to see Jesus for the very first time. And he's going to appear in a room, all the doors are locked, and they're going to hear and see Jesus for the first time together. And he's going to say something to him. And you wonder, what is Jesus going to say? What is Jesus going to say to his disciples? This is the resurrection moment, Is he going to go, hey guys, remember when I told you the Sermon on the Mount? Here we go again, press play. Is he going to go, hey guys, remember all those parables I told you? Let me give them to you all one more time so you'll remember them really well. It's not what he does. Actually, let's look and see what he does. In verse 19 of John 20, it says, and on the evening of the first day of the week, so that's like Easter evening, Sunday night, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for the fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and he stood among them and he said, this is a customary Jewish saying, peace be with you. Shalom in Hebrew. And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Now, you all know why, right? Because he was dead on a cross and he's standing in front of them and he's still got wounds in his hands and side. And the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And again, Jesus said, peace be with you. And then he said this, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. He shows up to them and he says, hey guys, peace. And here's my message. Here's my resurrection day message for you. As the Father sent me, remember Christmas, my whole life in Bethlehem and Nazareth and ministry, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you. And with that, he breathed on them and he said, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not, they are not forgiven. On this day of resurrection, Jesus gives to them the clear answer to the question, why? The mission. And I want you to see some things about this mission for our lives today, because I think they will help us to have that breakthrough into a new beginning. And I think that what's most profound here is that it is simple, right? Jesus could have said anything. Jesus knows everything. He could have said anything at this moment. But what he says is, the Father sent me, I am sending you. It is so important to know the why of life, why we're here and what it is we're really supposed to be doing. You know, a lot of people, as they go through life, they get to a certain point and they're like, this is what I am. I'm a student, or I'm an employee, or I'm a husband, or I'm a wife, or I'm a dad, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. And we identify ourselves and we think that is all that we are. But there's actually another assignment, if you're a Christian, that we come to understand. Like we have another job to do, another vocation. And it's this thing Jesus is talking about here, that God the Father has sent his Son, who has sent you and me to do the mission of God in the world today. We have a mission to do. Whatever your job is, you got a mission to do. Whatever you're doing, there's another higher agenda that you have in life than that. I learned this when I was in college, when I heard the story of a man whose job it was, he lived in Nashville, Tennessee, to operate an elevator. This is a true story. The guy's job, and this used to be a job, was to operate an elevator. And I don't know how complicated elevators used to be. Sometimes the elevator here at the church is a little risky. You kind of take your life into your own hands when you use it. We probably ought to have an elevator operator. But this guy's job was not seen by others as being very important. But he was a passionate Christian. And he loved his job because when people came into the elevator, the doors shut and he had them captive. And he could share the gospel with them. And that's what he did. And he loved to do it. And somebody asked him one time, what do you do? He said, I am a nobody telling everybody about somebody who can save anybody. I just never forget that story. Like he had a job, but he understood he had like another job, a bigger job, a better job, a higher mission to do than just what he was getting paid to do. He was on a mission from God to tell people about what God wanted him to do. That's what Jesus says in this passage. As the Father sent me, I'm sending you. And it's not a hard job, it's a simple job. It's not that complicated. When I was in college, as you all have heard me say before, I didn't grow up going to church. And when I was in college, somebody invited me to go to church for the very first time. This morning, my parents are not in church. My brothers are not in church. I did not grow up going to church in any way. And so it's kind of strange sometimes. People are like, how did you get in church? And like, how did you become a preacher, Because they don't just like hand that out to everybody, do they? It's like, maybe so. I mean, if you can do it, then anybody can. Y'all are just getting really too into that, I was in physics. You've heard me tell this story. I was in physics, and my lab partner had just become a Christian. And she said to me these words. She said, would you go to church with me this Sunday? Now, how long does it take to say those words? Would you go to church with me this Sunday? Not 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, not 20 minutes, not 30 minutes. I would guess it probably takes about 2.5 seconds. I don't know, somebody this afternoon, do the math, put it on social media, and we'll talk about it. But how long does it take to just say, would you go to church? And I said, yes. And her question and my answer changed my life. This morning, and I said this in the other service too, and you've heard me say this now several times, 93% of Ellis County, 200,000 people are not in church this morning. But many people say that if they were invited to come to church, they would. What if we were to just say those words, would you come to church with me this Sunday? I want to say this, don't underestimate the potential of a personal invitation. It can change someone's life. It changed my life. And maybe in this room, if we were to go around, some of you would say, that's my story too. Someone invited me. Somebody, when I was a kid, or somebody at some point in my life invited me, and my life was changed because of that. And I'm just thinking, how many thousands of people are we surrounded with that are not in church, but might be willing to come to church if they're just invited? I wonder what the statistic is on that. I wonder if anybody's done those numbers. Oh yeah, Ed Stetzer and Tom Rainer at Lifeway Research have been doing that for years, and they have the same statistic over and over again, and it's 82% of people say that they are likely or somewhat likely to attend church if someone invites them. That statistic blows my mind, because we all think that nobody would ever want to go to church if you invited them, but the statistics tell us that's not true. Like most people would be open to your invitation. So if that's the case, we would think that everybody in church world is out there doing that, right? No, Tom Rainer's got another statistic. 98% of churchgoers will never invite someone to church. 98% of American churchgoers will never invite anyone to church. 2% will do that. We got to change that. I think the statistic ought to be the other way around. 98% of people are willing this week to take 2.5 seconds out of our life to follow the mission of God. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. And just say, hey, would you like to go to church? We've all got someone in our life that we could do that with. But you know what? It's not just that experience for me with someone inviting me. Once I came to church for the very first time and I walked through the doors, there was somebody there to welcome me. And so I want to say this to you. Don't forget to say you're welcome. This morning, I hope you got a chance to say to somebody as they came in here today, just like you're welcome to be here. I hope that after the service, you'll talk to somebody you don't know and say, glad you're here. I hope you felt welcome to be here. Because as I walked into church that very first time, I just remember how warmly I was greeted. Do you know what the number one emotion people feel, by the way, when they walk to church for the very first time? The number one emotion, what would you guess? Some kind of anxiety. Fear is what Rainer says is the number one feeling people have. They're afraid they're going to be pointed out. They're afraid there's going to be attention drawn to them, that they're going to have to stand up. They're going to have to do something. They're going to have to say something. Like, just make people feel welcome can be one of the most wonderful ways of just helping people come into the life of the church and to come to know God. You know, when I came to church for the first time, I sat up in the balcony of that church, and all the people around me introduced themselves to me. Afterwards, they said, hey, do you want to come eat lunch? The next week, they actually kind of remembered who I was. And I felt like this was the feeling I had the first time I came to church. I felt like I was at home. I don't know what home feels like to you, but for me, church has always felt like home. It's a place like Cheers says, everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. It's simple, what he's talking about here, but it's powerful, isn't it? It's not only simple, though, it's also personal. Because as Jesus is talking to his disciples and he says, the Father sent me, I'm sending you, it's personal. Jesus had to personally enter the world. The disciples had to personally step out of their comfort zones and do what he was asking them to do here. The other example of Great Commission that we see in the Bible, there's a couple of places, but the other one is in Acts 1:8, and it's when Jesus said this to his disciples. It's a very similar passage. He says, you'll receive power when the Spirit comes on you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. The word witnesses means martyr, and it was a word for one who would make an appearance in a court of law. If this week you are called to testify in a court, the judge would never allow for a whole group of you to testify. You always have to go one by one. There's lots of legal reasons for this. But you have to sit there and you have to say that I'm giving you my experience. I am telling you what I saw, what I heard, what my memory of the experience was. And as we are witnesses for Jesus, we are personal witnesses. This is how my life has been impacted by God. And I want to say this to you. Don't underestimate the power of simply telling people your story. You have a story to tell. You have a story to tell about how God has impacted your life. Don't underestimate the power of just telling that story to someone and how that story can make an impact in their life. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. I was baptized. My parents went to church for like 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks of time, I heard the gospel in Sunday school, got baptized. And I'm forever grateful that experience happened to me, but I didn't have any growth take place in a Bible study or anything. And I remember all through school and all through high school, always feeling like I had this private Christian faith that I didn't want anyone else to know about. Now, don't raise your hand, but has anybody else ever had that feeling? Like there's this Christian faith that you have, but you're not super comfortable talking to anybody else about it. And when I was in college, that moment that my life was forever changed was in the fall of 97, and I was reading Romans 1:16, and this is what it said. This is Paul. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. And I read those words in bold. I put them in the outline. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. And I remember reading those words. And I was thinking, okay, I'm a Christian. At that point, I'm going to church. But I am so afraid. And frankly, I'm embarrassed by how afraid I am at sharing my faith. That frankly, I am ashamed of the gospel. I'm ashamed for everybody to know that I'm a Christian. Here it is, Paul says, I'm not ashamed. And the reason he says he's not ashamed is because it's powerful. He can save people. He's not ashamed to tell it because he knows that it has the power. Telling the story of your life has the power to impact another person, to change another person's life. One of my favorite stories about this in the Bible is the story of Zacchaeus in Luke 19. If you don't remember Zacchaeus, he was the wee little man that was on the top of a sycamore tree in Jericho. And by the way, Jesus wasn't supposed to be going to his house that day. If you know the story in Luke's gospel, Jesus was on his way to the cross. He was on his way. Jericho was just a place you went through as you made the road up the Jericho road to Jerusalem. But in the tree is this guy looking at Jesus. And you got to wonder, why in the world was Zacchaeus ever even looking at Jesus? Zacchaeus was a tax collector and a sinner. What tax collector and sinner ever needed Jesus? Kind of all of them, right? Kind of all of us needed Jesus. Jesus walks up. I mean, he's on his way to the cross. He leaves the Jericho road, if you will, and he walks up to the sycamore tree, and he looks up at Zacchaeus, and he says, I must come to your house today. I got to come to your house. And they're having a meal. And you know the conversation. Zacchaeus is a very wealthy tax collector. He's been using his wealth and influence and power to make himself great, but he's been not fair to a lot of people. And Jesus says, you got to get that right. You got to get your financial stuff right. And then he says, okay, I'll do that. And then Jesus says to them, today, salvation has come to your house. Today, me walking into your house and us having this conversation over this dinner table has transformed your life forever. And I want to say this to you today. Don't forget to show hospitality. You know, we think of like what does it mean to share your faith? And we think it means you walk up to somebody, cold call on the side of the street, whack them over the head with a holy leather-bound holy Bible and read John 3:16 as they recover from their coma or whatever. That is not what it means to share the gospel. To share the gospel means hospitality. It means invitation. It means relationship. It means just being a real Christian and just caring enough to fit somebody else into your busy schedule. Listen to what the book of Hebrews says in chapter 13, verse 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Angels unaware. That's what the old King James said. Brennan Manning, who wrote the book, The Ragamuffin Gospel, once described sharing our faith like this. It's one of my favorite analogies in the whole of his whole book. He said that sharing the gospel is like this. The gospel is one beggar showing another beggar where to find a piece of bread. I love that analogy. We desperately need the gospel, but so does the 93% of the people who are not in church today. Now, here's the deal. Some of you are going to walk out of this sermon and you're going to go, you know what? You know what? I'm going to do it. I know that person I need to invite to church next week, and I'm going to walk up to them this week, and I'm going to have that conversation, and I'm going to take those 2.5 seconds and say, maybe even make it into 1 second. Would you like to go through church next Sunday? Just really fast, you know? And they're like, what? What did you just say? Well, I'm only going to ask once, so. But you know what's going to happen is some of you are going to have that experience, and then you're going to discover that there are some people who are willing to, but they've got some questions, and they've got some struggles, and they've got some, I don't know, and maybe some that have got some walls built up around it. So let me just say this. This mission that Jesus sends us on to be Him to the world, this gospel can be misunderstood. And we as human beings, we've got a lot of myths and a lot of excuses. And I guarantee you, if you try this for very long, you will hear all of these. In 20 years of professional ministry, I've heard of these sometimes all in the same day and sometimes by the same person. Here's some of them. Number one, I'm a good person, so I'm okay. I hear what you're saying about going to church, and I hear what you're saying about Jesus, and I hear what you're saying about Christianity for you, but for me, I'm okay. I'm a good person, right? That is such a strong feeling that people have. I hear from people all the time, I'm a good parent, or I'm a good this, or I'm a good that. Therefore, I'm okay. I was watching, years ago, I was watching Warren Buffett step to the microphone. You know Warren Buffett, billionaire, Oracle of Omaha. And Bill and Melinda Gates had just started their foundation. They had given their billions, and they were trying to get Oprah and everybody else to give their money. And Warren Buffett decided he was going to give his billions. What's $50, $60 billion after a while, I guess. And Warren Buffett steps to the microphone. I remember he said this because I wrote it down. He said, if this doesn't get me into heaven, nothing will. And you know, Buffett's always got that little wry smile. And you kind of think he said that sort of tongue-in-cheek. But he was giving voice to a sense, a belief in our society today. That if we're really just good enough, God's going to be like, you know what? I've been waiting for a person like you to get into heaven for a long time. I'm so glad you decided. You're just so good. But that's not the truth, is it? The truth is that in the New Testament, there was a whole group of people like that, and they were called the Pharisees, and they followed every dot and every law and every rule and every ritual perfectly. But to them, Jesus said, nothing good. Here's another myth, another common misconception. The gospel, you'll hear people say this, like the gospel is great and all, but I got to do my part too. It's kind of like the pride kicking in. The gospel's great. Like, I believe in that whole Christianity thing, but I got to do my part too. My problem with this is that it always becomes about me. And at the cross, like I said a few weeks ago, Jesus didn't say it's like mostly finished or it's partly finished. I did my part, now you do yours. He said, it is finished. At Zacchaeus' house, Jesus said, today salvation has come to your house. Today. I still believe in a God who has the power of today, that today can be a new beginning, that today, not because you've done enough, but because He is enough. Not because Christianity is spelled D-O, but it's spelled D-O-N-E. Here's a third excuse. Since I got myself into this situation, I got to get myself out, right? All right, I messed up my life. And when I get this part of my life fixed, and I get this part of my life fixed, and I get that part of my life fixed, and then I get that part of my life fixed, then I'll start going to church, and then I'll start doing all this stuff. What's the problem? Never going to happen. We're never going to get our life all fixed, all right? That's never going to come first, that cart horse thing. It's got to be the other way around. And I was thinking of the example of this was like maybe the most televised event ever. Remember the gold miners that got trapped, the Chilean gold miners? And I mean, we were just like, we watched TV nonstop to see what was going to happen to them. And they drilled the bit down, and the bit came back, and they had no idea they were alive, but on it said, "Estamos bien en refugio." Those 33, the 33 are safe down in the. And they're all down there, and then this operation goes, and they're sending these more drill bits down, and they create this pod, and they start rescuing the guys out one after another. That was the most incredible, miraculous thing I've ever seen on television. Still just takes my breath away. Well, I mean, I was just pins and needles to see what was going to happen. But can you imagine one of those guys down there, they're stuck down there all those days, and one of them says, you know what, I know that vessel could take me to the surface and get me out of here, but I don't think I'm going to go that way. I think I'm going to get myself out of this. I got myself into this situation. I'm going to get myself out, and I have this trusty spoon. I am going to dig through thousands of feet of rock. How's that going to work out for you? Is he going to get out? No, he's going to die. And this is the condition of our world today. They are trapped in a situation that they cannot save themselves from. They need someone to drill down into their situation and to rescue them, to deliver them, to save them out and bring them to the surface. They need a Savior. I got myself into this situation. I have to get myself out. Will never work. We will never be able to save ourselves. And here's the last one, and it's the one that if all else fails, we'll always use, and that is, I've got plenty of time. You know, sooner or later, one of these days, I'll get around to doing what God wants me to do. One day I'll do it. C.S. Lewis said that the chief weapon of the enemy is not to tell Christians there's no God. It's not even to point at Christians and say, you guys are hypocrites, even though sometimes we are. It is to say, there's just no hurry. There's no rush. There are thousands of people that we're surrounded by that desperately need to hear the gospel of Jesus. And we have been the ones sent by the Father who sent the Son. As the Father sent me, so send I you, to be the ones to tell them. And the hourglass is running out in their lives, and the opportunities are running out in our lives. So let's do that. Maybe right now, as I kind of finish this sermon, God's maybe even put somebody on your heart, on your mind right now, like, just this week, I'm going to have that 2.5-second conversation. Just that person, maybe just God, give me the chance, give me the opportunity where I can broach the subject, that I can bring it up.